Chinese have completely grinded their imports to a halt in August.
In August, we expect also very low imports of U.S. crude oil into China, and next month.
By mid-2025, China had quietly erased American oil from its shopping list. From 160,000 barrels a day to almost nothing. No warning, no speech, just a 10% tariff and silence. While Beijing was locking in oil deals with Russia and Iran, paid in yuan, the man sitting in the Oval Office was still yelling about tariffs like it was 2018. Ports in Texas stood half empty, pipelines slowed to a crawl, but the business genius in the West Wing was too busy fighting Canada over wood and screaming at wind turbines. He called it leverage. The rest of the world called it quitting. And now, the world's biggest oil buyer is gone, and America got played by its own salesman. China once bought 160,000 barrels of American oil per day, not exactly a flood, but enough to justify billions of dollars in Gulf Coast export infrastructure. Terminals were expanded, pipelines were built, tankers were lined up like Uber drivers outside a Texas refinery. Then, in February 2025, China added a modest 10% tariff. And just like that, the orders stopped. Cold. Even the discounted barrels got the silent treatment. No ban, no statement. Just silence. The kind that echoes through empty port facilities from Corpus Christi to Houston. Storage tanks that once turned over weekly are sitting half full. Pipelines meant to feed Asia now pump nowhere. It wasn't sabotage, it was strategy. A quiet rerouting of the future, while America's commander-in-truth social was still yelling at windmills and congratulating himself on a trade war that aged like unrefrigerated milk. But China didn't walk alone. Mexico and Canada? Yes, the two countries literally connected to us are now building the Northern Corridor, a billion-dollar logistics route that bypasses U.S. ports entirely, redirecting over $120 billion in annual trade through their own Pacific and Atlantic channels. The plan? Keep supply chains moving, just not through Uncle Sam's backyard. You don't need a map to see what's happening. The U.S. was once the center of gravity, the dependable middleman. Now, allies are linking arms and tiptoeing around the guy screaming about tariffs and threatening to renegotiate everything. And the worst part? No one even slammed the door. They just stopped knocking. This wasn't just the loss of a buyer. It was the unraveling of something bigger, America's image as a reliable partner. And the man in the White House? He wasn't abandoned. He was left behind, holding a megaphone, shouting into a room that quietly emptied months ago. So what did China do after ghosting American oil? They didn't pause. They pivoted fast. Within months, Beijing had expanded long-term supply contracts with Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. The volumes were locked in. The prices? Competitive? And the payment? Not a single cent in US dollars. Most of the new deals were inked in yuan, China's own currency, removing the greenback from the equation altogether. These weren't panic buys. This was a full rewiring of the import system, trade lanes, contracts, tanker schedules, refinery specs, payment networks. All optimized to handle Middle Eastern and Russian blends, not American crude. Like installing a new operating system that doesn't run the old software and then throwing away the manual. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the man who once claimed he could outdeal OPEC was busy blaming Canada for high lumber prices and tweeting about how windmills kill birds. The rest of the world was moving on, and our energy policy looked like a garage sale of bad ideas and broken promises. Even if US oil dropped to bargain bin prices, the Chinese system isn't built to take it anymore. It's not just political, it's logistical. The ports are different. The pipelines are different. The refinery configurations are different. Trying to squeeze American crude back into that setup now would be like forcing a square peg into a keyhole, blindfolded, while bragging you invented the lock. And let's be honest, the only energy flowing from the West Wing these days is hot air. The world's largest oil importer rewrote its playbook and didn't even bother to copy us in the email. Of course, this wasn't just about oil. It never is. Because when China rewired its supply lines, it didn't just reroute barrels, it rerouted currency. By July 2025, most of China's long-term oil contracts with Russia, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE were no longer priced in dollars. They were signed, sealed, and settled in yuan. That shift may sound technical, but in practice, it's a slow, calculated incision into the financial artery of American power. Every barrel priced in yuan is a barrel that doesn't touch the dollar, and every deal that bypasses U.S. banks weakens Washington's ability to impose sanctions, dictate trade terms, or even measure what the world is doing. That's not a bug. That's the feature. Iran, of course, took the backdoor route. Thanks to its trusty shadow fleet and a few creative shipping manifests, it's been pushing millions of barrels to Chinese teapots, small private refiners who don't care if the oil comes labeled crude or contraband, so long as it's cheap and dollar-free. But what did the man in charge do while this currency mutiny unfolded? Nothing unless you count calling the yuan funny money at a rally in Iowa. The rest of the world, tariffs are like seasoning. The more you add, the better it tastes. Now, we have ports without purpose, pipelines to nowhere, and a White House still convinced it won the trade war. As America builds pipelines to nowhere, China's been busy filling barrels. By mid-2025, Beijing quietly expanded its strategic petroleum reserves to cover more than 3 months' worth of imports, well above the International Energy Agency recommended global average. The suppliers? The usual suspects. Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, not exactly members of the America First fan club. This isn't just about stockpiling for emergencies, it's a power play. With full tanks and long-term deals in yuan, China can negotiate prices, ignore shocks, and shrug off US pressure, all while keeping the taps flowing. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Congress is still debating whether to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at all, assuming the 47th president remembers where it's located. And while Beijing's oil bunkers are full, our biggest export seems to be denial. The West Wing is still performing its one-man show titled Mission Accomplished 2, Trade War Boogaloo. While the rest of the world quietly moves on. Once again, China didn't need a confrontation, just calculation. And while America was still writing press releases, China was writing purchase orders in bulk. It's not just China. The oil world is shifting, and the ripple effect is now a global current. In July, India signed expanded long-term contracts with Russia, locking in discounted crude with yuan-denominated settlements. They even revived old Soviet-era shipping routes to bypass the Strait of Hormuz altogether. Southeast Asian buyers, from Malaysia to Thailand, are tweaking their oil purchase frameworks to match China's playbook, favoring suppliers who often. China didn't slam a door in America's face, they just built a new house. One with different locks, different rules, and no doorway labeled U.S. entry. And while they were redrawing trade maps, Washington was too busy throwing culture war confetti and fighting imaginary villains on cable news. Even Canada,